Good morning, colleagues. How are you today? And welcome to our first all-staff meeting, which is virtual. We're looking at a slide of an empty East Indian Marine Hall, but let's just imagine we're there. Who could indeed have imagined that we'd be conducting our staff meeting virtually? But here we are in another step of adapting to our new reality together and with the help of technology. I think this will impact us going forward. I'm probably going to be able to do a lot more of this in the future, which will be, I think, one of the opportunities out of everything that's happened. And hopefully there aren't too many hurdles for any of you signing up for the meeting. And I think at the time we started, we had over 140 people, so that's terrific. You're going to be able to submit your questions to us during the meeting, and we'll get to them at the end of our agenda. So as we gather here this morning, we have some photographs that we've taken recently. I don't know if you can see those at the moment. This one I took just a couple of mornings ago down at Salem Harbor, and I suppose there are a couple of lessons here. One is that the sun does always come up. The second, I suppose, is that the Peabody Essex Museum is in a beautiful place, and this is the friendship of Salem and the wonderful offering being made here to the sun, and I think very beautiful. And then last evening, another picture was taken, and it was only last Friday, I think, or last week, at the end of the week, that I challenged our creative team, let's do something else, and look what everybody came up with. We have the terrific lighting here on the sign that says hope anchors the soul, and hope anchors in the soul, wrapped in the middle by a heart, a love heart. This is very, very beautiful for our iconic building, and this is of course a biblical reference, but one that is used in many aspects of society if you want to Google it. And we do indeed see ourselves as an anchor, as this is fixed right above this big anchor that we put in at the end of last year and reinstalled. So thanks to everybody involved in that project. A good few people where we'll name them all in due course. But beautiful picture, I think an inspiration to our community. And we'll put this very live socially over the next little while. As we gather this morning, I'm remembering our very first all-staff meeting, which was in July last. A lot of happy faces there, as I reminded you all of the importance of our humanity and of being present to each other. And today, as I remember my first day as your colleague, I remind you that we are 1/3, it was 1/5 and then 1/4, but 1/3 through what we anticipate will be our closure period. So 2/3 to go. So you can see this is very far from a sprint. This is an endurance marathon, and I really do appreciate it for everybody. This presents challenges, domestic challenges, challenges of family and friends and things you're going to have to deal with as this puts pressure on people's lives. And so we do need to be very present in our own lives, I think. And because on the one hand, we are more isolated, but on the other hand, we have this opportunity to come together, as you all see me now, in fact, connected in ways that have never been before for us. I've been really heartened by your stories of collaboration, which have been wonderful, and by your compassion and support for each other. Those of you who have really sadly and unfortunately lost family members. Fortunately, none of our staff have, as we know it anyway, contracted COVID-19 and become sick, but family members have been in hospital, and we just cherish the way that you're all seeking to reach out to each other, and we'll need to continue that in this unfamiliar territory together. So thank you, as ever, but especially for all that you're doing. Keep making your museum proud, and do sit up, chin up, and let's keep moving forward. Now, as I shared with you on the all-staff video that I did last Thursday, PEM moved quickly to apply to the Small Business Administration loan scheme called the Paycheck Protection Program, in an effort to secure a loan as part of the Coronavirus Aid, Relief and Economic Security Act, what is now known as the CARES Act. And I alluded to the administrative challenges involved in such a process as thousands of banks, lending institutions throughout the country were now working with the US Treasury on tight deadlines and with high stakes to secure loans for so many businesses across the country. I had hoped to update you today on our loan application with Salem 5 this morning, but we're still awaiting final information on our application at this time, though we do expect it shortly. Now, I have to say to you that we will continue to keep you posted on the matter as we find out more and what it will mean for the museum's operations, but especially its staff operations. Please know that if we get the PPP, it will be helpful, but only in the short term. Painfully, and it really is painful to consider, that I must emphasize that there will be nonetheless serious reductions required in our staff numbers and in our non-staff expenditures in the coming financial year. And we've already had, for example, a significant impact on our exhibition program that Linda will refer to later. We're very fortunate to have a terrific board, and quite a number of people on our board have been involved for a very long time. And as in the case with all our other staff meetings since last July, we have invited a board member to attend with us. And I thought it was very important that the board leadership should be with us this morning. And I'm delighted that our board president, Rob Shapiro, is with us. And I truly want to thank him for his extraordinary dedication to PEM over the decades. He has bestowed upon us not just his time, his talent, his treasure, but his acute intelligence and guidance, and especially his warm compassion. So let's welcome Rob.
Thank you, Brian. I'm so delighted to be with everybody this morning. Good morning, and hope everybody is safely sequestered and well. You know, it was only a few weeks ago that I was in East India Marine Hall with you, which I was delighted to be. I'm delighted to be virtually back there with you all now. Didn't quite realize it would take this form. But it's great when we can all be together. And I want to express my gratitude personally and for the board for everything you're doing, working nonstop. You know, the website says PEM is closed, which of course it is in the sense that the doors are closed. But, you know, I like to think, and everybody I talk to who cares about PEM and is involved knows that PEM itself is not closed. PEM is open, and PEM is vibrant because you are making it vibrant and open. The gates will be unbarred eventually, but the doorways, other portals are open already because of what you're doing. And, you know, I think everybody is loving the PEM at home idea, the PEMcasts, and every other aspect, exploring the collections and being involved. And I think actually that's a feature that we want to emphasize and carry on. The doors will open to the physical space, but we should remain at home with all of our family members. They're members of the PEM family, but we're also members of their family. And what better way to share stories than to be in people's living room, kitchen, family gathering space on a daily basis. And I hope that continues. It's a different kind of vibrancy. And we have all sorts of doorways. So we'll open the front doors, but we've already opened other doors into PEM and opened doors to be welcomed into everyone's household. So I'm very proud of that. And I have to say, seeing the facade of East India Marine Hall just now, Brian mentioned that it's iconic, and it is the great American architecture critic Ada Louise Huxtable, who grew up in Marblehead and Salem, and single-handedly, when she was writing for the New York Times, posted a story on the front page of the New York Times, and one powerful woman writing as an architecture critic in the New York Times prevented the federal highway from running about 100 yards away from that building and destroying so much of Salem's historic presence. So that, and she always, reminded me, we were close personal friends. I was very lucky that this building is literally an icon. It is one of the great buildings of American architecture. It's not just important in Salem. It is great in the history of the country and the heritage of the country, and we are stewards of it. And I can't think of anything more appropriate than what we're doing by signaling that affirmative spirit on that facade and on that historic presence right next to our brand new modern building that has just opened. And in that sense, PEM itself is, I think of it as a living presence. PEM itself is present to us, just as Brian urges us to be present to each other. So I want to thank you for all of that. It really, lifts my heart to see that heart in the window, and it's because of everything you're doing. So thanks again. Thanks for letting me take part in these meetings. It's a very special opportunity for me, as is every day that I'm involved with PEM. So thanks very much.
Well, thank you, Rob. Thanks for being with us as always, and for so long. We have a lot of work to do and great opportunity in the next period, and I'll talk about that later in terms of our strategic planning. But we'll go through the agenda for today, which will begin with Natalie, who's really been doing a terrific job with her team, but sharing updates about our finances. And then next, I'll tell you more, as I said, about strategic planning, all these wonderful smiling faces at the opening last September in the great red t-shirts, wonderful. Then Linda Hartigan and Kathy Fredrickson will update us on a very exciting project, the PEM Guidebook project. But first of all, let's try this. It's a new one, and let's just say we probably won't win awards. But we have an important task, which is to sing happy birthday to our colleagues born in the month of April. So Mark Wood is going to unmute us all so that we can sing along together, and hopefully somebody will record. Well, all this is being recorded, so maybe might win prizes. So the PEM chorus invites you all to take part, and we'll give it a go. So I'll just start.
Everybody's unmuted.
Are you ready, everybody? Happy birthday. 1, 2, 3, out loud.
Happy birthday
to you.
Happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday, everyone. Happy birthday to you.
It's a difficult time, of course, personally, but I know that we need our moments of joy, so do take them. So now I want to thank Natalie, as I said, our Chief Financial Officer, for working so diligently and effectively in recent weeks. It has been significant work. I was talking with her this morning, and it was only at about 11 p.m. last night that we were also in touch with our bank. So the banks are working hard. And so she joins us this morning from her home to update us on the financial situation. And she's going to share some important information about our endowment in the hope to make clear to you what the financial situation for PEM will be in the years going forward. So welcome, Nat.
Thank you, Brian. Hi, everybody. I'm delighted to be talking with you. And Brian has been a champion of transparency, and that we start our series of quarterly updates on the finances. And so we'll start with the endowment. So if we can go to the next slide. Thank you. So, you're aware, of course, this is not just a global health crisis. It's also a global financial crisis, and the stock markets have been extremely volatile and going down. So the blue line you see on this chart is showing how our endowment has been doing since the first quarter of 2016. And it has, known a great growth, benefiting from gifts through 2015 in particular, and a really bullish stock market. But the last year or so has been really volatile, with down periods, up periods of recovery. But in March in particular, we've seen a precipitous drop, and we don't really know where it's going and how long it's going to take to recover. What we understand, though, is the impact it has on our appropriation for operating support, which is this yellow broken line underneath. The growth of the endowment has supported a significant growth of the annual appropriations, so supporting operations. And that's really what has enabled PEM to develop the way it has. What we know, because of the recent performance of the endowment, is that this will flatten out. And so we can anticipate already that the annual appropriation will no longer grow the way it has over the past few years, but will pretty much stay flat. So next slide. Wanted to cover also what the drop of attendance is doing to our revenue. So the chart on the left is showing the first quarter of attendance over the past few years, so since 2015. And many of you will remember that 2015 in New England was snowed in very significantly, and so we had very few people who could actually move and come into the museum. And so it was a low year for all of us in New England. And then in 2018, we had a record attendance year with the Georgia O'Keeffe show that really drew a lot of people. And so you can see how 2020 is positioned versus these other years. The chart on the right shows the 6-month view, so January through June. And for 2020, we know we will not have any more visitors than we had through March, since we are closed. So it's showing you how our attendance stacks against the prior years. And I think what is also interesting in noting there is the ratio of people coming in who pay admission compared to the people who don't pay admission. And so complimentary, non-paying admissions represents about 53% in a normal year. But for us this year, this quarter, and therefore this half year, it represents 2/3 of the entries, and that's because of the promotions we've had in welcoming people to the exhibition during the Martin Luther King's Jr. Week. And we also started new programs with Bank of America. So we have about 2/3 of the admissions actually were free. This was, what we intended. It also has consequences on our earned revenue. So I'll go to the next slide to talk more broadly about earned revenue. So what you see here is on the left, the budget for revenue for the first quarter of 2020, and on the right, what we actually brought in the first quarter of 2020. So overall, as of the end of March, the first 3 months, we're reporting a loss of $400,000. But the revenue loss was actually $1 million. And then we'll talk a little bit more about the cost. We have reduced costs by about $600,000. So the revenue was lower than budget by $1 million. We were at 7.3 million versus a budget of 8.3. And I'll talk about each of these components, starting from the bottom, the blue bar. The blue bar is the annual appropriation from endowment. So resulting from what we discussed just before in terms of where the endowment is. What we are appropriating this year is not based on the most recent quarter of endowment value. It's based on a 3-year average. So we have visibility and we have stability for some time about how much we're bringing in. So no variation in actual to budget. We are using the appropriation from endowment that we had planned to use. The orange bar or slides above is how much of the funds we could release, we could use that are tagged to very specific activities. And so if we perform these activities, we use the funds. If we don't perform these activities, we cannot access the funds. So examples are the work we do on historic houses. We have funds which are tagged to historic houses work. If we do it, we use the funds. If we don't, we don't. We have funds associated with the collection center, further development, and it's the same story. If we do it, we use them. If we don't, we don't. And so there is about $435,000 of work that we did not do in the first quarter. Therefore, we did not release these funds. The annual fundraising actually was, pretty much as expected, impacted only by about $65,000. And the top slice, the yellow slice, is really the one that was significantly affected because of the decline in paid admissions. And so the admissions revenue, the shop sales were much lower than expected. And traveling shows also were impacted. And so we had about $500,000 less revenue in that category. So next slide, let's talk about costs. So expenses, as I mentioned before, were about $600,000 under budget. Personnel were actually at budget, so we've kept everybody paid through the end of March. And so not surprisingly, our actuals are what we budgeted. But because the other costs were reduced, it's just notable that our percentage of expenses allocated to personnel has now grown from 56% to 60%. Exhibition budget is the orange slice. We're about $115,000 over budget, and that's really just a timing issue associated with made-it expenses that happened earlier than planned. So no overage in the overall budget, just pulled a little bit earlier than what we had expected. There is about $450,000 of outside services that were not contracted, and so that relates to snow removal. We had a mild winter, so we did not have to remove as much snow as we thought we might. I alluded earlier to the fact that there is some work in the collection center that is not moving forward yet, and so that didn't get spent. And same for some work associated with the bar innovation grant and historic houses. The campus master plan also is being rethought to some extent, and so some of the funds we had earmarked in the first quarter were not spent. And then finally, about $265,000 of other types of costs, such as advertising, printing, supplies, travel, hospitality, did not get spent as we changed the way of work and reduced discretionary expenses. Next slide. So, understanding all this, what's next for PEM Finances? We heard and we expect continued revenue sources in decline. And so for the short year of 2020, we do expect that would be about $3 million under revenue budget. As mentioned, endowment support will flatten, the earned revenue will almost stop, and the contributed revenue may diminish as well because donors do react as well to these changed environmental and market conditions. Next slide. We are seeking temporary funding from government relief packages. Brian alluded to that. We are asking our closest donors to support us. Next. And there will be lasting impacts. So we have to acknowledge that this is not just a 2 or 3 month situation. We have to adapt our business model. We have to adapt our cost structure to these new conditions. Exhibition programs must be rescoped. We have done a lot of work already in doing so. Priscilla's team, Linda's team have been, we'll share more about this. The operating costs must be reduced. There is no question that we have to look at our personnel and non-personnel costs and rethink how we're doing business. And then new opportunities for both earned revenues and contributed revenues must be created. Next. What we anticipate looking at this trajectory is that while we are currently on a $36 million budget, we're looking at a decline of this budget, and by 2023 expect that we will have to be operating around a $30 million budget. So that's a 20% reduction compared to where we are now. So it's quite significant and will require a lot of consideration to what we're doing and how we're doing it. And I'd like to conclude with a slightly more uplifting slide and salute all of you and the work you're doing, and also acknowledge the finance team who's working, through this from work, making sure that we all are paid, that we understand where our investments are, that the gifts we get are deposited, that our vendors get paid, that we understand financial projections that are realistic, and also acknowledging that Steve and Dan are working very closely with the auditors right now. We are in an audit period, making sure that everything is as it should be. And so thank you to my colleagues in the finance team, and cheers to you all. We will get through this together, and we will celebrate again. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie, very much indeed. Lovely slide. So now on to the strategic planning process, and I'll return to some of your questions. Just so you know, they're popping up on my screen, and I'll respond to them later. I don't see who's asked them, so feel comfortable, just put them up there, and I never know that because I have to do right on the tables normally. And so please do ask any questions. If I can't get to them all during the meeting, I'll get to them afterwards. So you, as our PEM staff, are of course integral to the strategic planning process, and we've been through a lot of work already. I invited friend and colleague Andras Zanto, who is a museum consultant, to help with the next stage as we move through, which is essentially trying to redefine the vision, and asking him to write back to me what he heard me saying about what you had all said, and what I believe is necessary for the next stage of PEM. And that has been exciting. But what he did say was that he'd never seen a process, and he can only imagine what it would be costed us if we got in consultants to do it, that had generated so many questions, so many responses. I mean, in the hundreds and hundreds, actually a couple of thousand, from all of you as we went through all those processes of hour-long meetings in the PEM Connect building. And we will continue that as we move forward in the next 2 months. We had over 200 of you join as colleagues in those roundtable sessions and answer what were foundational questions for moving forward. We've had a model of the museum for a quarter of a century that has matured into a situation which now needs to be re-examined, and that was the end of a terrifically transformative period by the leadership of Dan Monroe with all of you and with the board. And so the questions we asked were, why PEM, and who is PEM for today? And you've seen a lot of emphasis in recent discussions. For example, Andras wrote an article in ArtNet News the other day, which has 7 million subscribers. It was in Page's list of articles. It's in Douglas MacLennan's Art Journal as well. So you can look it up. But it was about how should museums seek to re-enter as we reopen, and I'll refer to that again a bit later. So we're thinking about things very, very differently. We won't be thinking so much about national, international travel as the airline industry, which is flat, seeks to reboot. And then we'll be thinking more regionally and indeed locally. And these are just inevitable realities of our circumstance. So those sorts of questions will inform what we will look like in 5 years' time. And we've still work to do with the board on envisioning. We did come up with key objectives. You will recall what they were. To expand access to the collection, which would be especially virtually, but also to bring out many aspects of the collection that we haven't been seeing for some time. And we're going to do a lot of that in October and November, and I'm excited about that. We need to maximize use of our facilities. We need to have this balance between our historic properties and all the new construction that we built, and recognize that we are significant property owners, but most of our properties are actually inactive. We need to nurture a collaborative, inclusive culture. We need to set that as an objective, and then really deliver the activities that would engender that for everybody. We need to generate resources, and I think in particular to COVID-19, there would be a reaction of the importance of collaboration and the importance of partnerships, which you, of course, highlighted as that objective. And then we need to engage a more diverse audience. We need to build our audiences. We need to find new audiences. So we're entering phase 3 of the strategic planning process with the staff, and we will guide that with you. And I'm thankful indeed for the work of many, but in particular, Sarah has helped me with this from day one, and it's a lot of work. But we will be calling you to group meetings like the one you're on, but you'll be active in responding during the meetings. This will concern how we're going to do what we're setting out to do, those objectives I just outlined. And we can't gather any more directly, but we will do a lot of work virtually in that 2/3 of our anticipated closure period that is still ahead of us. So our aim is to put a formalized strategic plan to the board, but particularly at the board, to work with the Board of Trustees initially on our vision. I want to talk about that. It will inform our capital campaign. Our capital campaign was significantly devoted to the realization of the wonderful new wing that we have, and also the collection centre. And I think it's important to note that the last time that we were at 30 million, Natalie said we anticipate in modelling dropping from 36 million, a 20% reduction, to 30 million by 2023. But it was only in 2017 that our budget actually was 30 million. And so we were thriving then, and we have added the collection centre and the new wing, but we can work that through. But it is significant, of course, that you looked at the expenses of the institution, and 60% of them are staff. So 60% of the reduction is going to have to be staff, and 40% non-staff if it's paralleling the monies that we take from the endowment. And this is really difficult. But at the same time, we need to revive ourselves, because we need to reach out to the community to gain enthusiasm for the new agenda for PEM and the new relevance that we will try to resolve. We need to reimagine America's oldest continuously operating art museum for our time. So it's a sort of a new version of the present tense, which is a true initiative for us right now. We have to live in the present, because a lot of the future is not clear. So you expect much more information from me and from Sarah Denegola as we continue our strategic planning. Working with Androsh, he focused at my request on George Schwartz's wonderful book, Collecting the Globe, about the East India Marine Society. Some of you have seen it. I mean, I really would encourage you to just treat yourself to the book and help George out as well by ordering it on Amazon. It'll just arrive in the mail, and it's just terrific. But what it does is it focuses the museum on what were its original origins as the intelligent interests of Salem sea captains, as George described it, a beautiful phrase. But these intelligent interests were the interests of people who were schooled by traveling around the world more than they were from going to college. And so they were lay people's interests. There were many great scholars and people of huge achievement. Nathaniel Bowditch, again, didn't go to university, but the Reverend Bentley. This place, Salem, was a real hive of intellectual activity and continued that. But the museum resolved itself to become a new entity again and again. And it was with the great infusion of monies from George Peabody in the 1860s that was that first great reshake-up of the institutions that would become ours. And the emphasis on natural history and the Peabody Academy of Science was deliberate emphasis away from what was happening with other museums that were established much after us. Sebastian Smee wrote an article honoring the 150th anniversary of the Metropolitan Museum the other day in the Washington Post. You know, it's extraordinary for them to have this wonderful moment, but be closed and be talking about really, you know, having to take action that is not what they would have wanted in such a celebratory year, but to revive themselves. And he noted in that article that, of course, they're not the oldest museum, or the MFA, that recently had a wonderful celebration as well last year. And it's us, the Peabody Essex Museum, as he said, and then the Wadsworth Athenaeum as the oldest public art museum. And so the reinvention that PEM had was very much something that was to do with being an American independent civic association in that manner of Alexis de Tocqueville, who visited Salem and was the great traveler to America in the late 18th century. And that sort of definition of what Australian, God, forgive me, tired, American life and character would be. And what would be? This museum became a whole multi-dimensional activity. It was critiqued, at one stage by the director of the Field Museum as simply a collection of oddities to entertain the masses. And nothing could have been further from the truth, because this institution managed to become all sorts of different things at the same time, telling the legacy of maritime history and global exchange, but essentially becoming, yes, a cabinet of curiosities, but also articulating that global experience. So the vision is an international vision from Salem, but also the coming home. So it was a social organization which was about sociability. So we had lots of parades, and we had great dinners, and there was a real strong emphasis on food, and there were multiple toasts. One of those marked in 1806 by Emily Larson's sign. That was the first sign that we had to Salem during the current crisis. It was an archive of what was once America's most lucrative mercantile center. And it was a means to understand the world. It was a place of science. It was a place of global knowledge. It was a place of tradition. It was a place for the American Enlightenment. It was a place that brought great erudition. I mean, think Nathaniel Hawthorne, and think the Transcendentalist, think Emerson, think Thoreau, all these wonderful people who came to Salem. It was a museum in a time of slavery. It was a museum in a time of the destruction of Native American cultures. And it collected material from all over the world. It was a place of art. It was also a place of artifact. It was a place that cherished objects that were actually made for utilitarian purpose all over the world, and indeed that were, to a considerable extent, ephemeral, or could have been if not collected. And it was a portal to the world. I mean, think of all the firsts that we'll investigate in the Salem Experience exhibition in October. The firsts of Salem, there's so many of them, of this intellectual center of great, great innovation. And they're trading firsts, but also travel firsts. I mean, the first ship to go to so many different countries, the list is quite extraordinary. And it was a place of discovery and of learning. So discovering PEM and exploring PEM will be very much part of what we're going to talk about. Now, I really want to excite the board about that, and that our origins actually tell us our DNA, and our DNA helps to describe the various aspects of possibility that we have as a museum. And we're going to need to refine them, and we're already doing that. I think the new wing was a wonderful step in that direction, with its 3 floors so beautifully displayed. But also in the collection center and all the great work that Dan is leading there, and John, and the staff of the collection center, the archive, the sense of engagement, and the relationship with the Salem History Project that's taking place at the moment. And you've seen all this in the PEM Messenger, and you'll see a lot more of it in the years to come. So expect a lot of that, and that is really the antidote to our issues, because although we have had challenges for the institution in the past, I mean, most recently, of course, in the downturn of 2009, so not that long ago, but particularly in terms of 1918 and the Spanish influenza here in Salem, and the fire that occurred just some years before, and all the people who were tented on Salem Common for a year, while that whole area was rebuilt as one of the most fireproofed areas, building areas in the country at that time. So much to do, and I really do encourage you to think these matters through and join with us in the next month or two, because we do need to push that process forward. We've already done so much work, and that has been, in a sense, interrupted, but that's a good thing, because it gave us a chance to recharge. Certainly for myself, I frankly will say to you that we moved to the what to do and the how to do it, but we really needed to think about what is PEM and the possibilities of this institution. And that's what Rob Shapiro has been such a great thought partner in this, as indeed members of our staff and the executive team. And I invite you all to be part of that, but read George's book. Okay, next up. Kathy Fredrickson has been doing a terrific job working on PEM's Guidebook project. Linda Hartigan has been leading all of our curators. I'm really excited about how enthused that they are, and I've had some wonderful presentations. So over to you, Kathy and Linda. Linda first, yeah.
All right. Well, hi, everyone. It's really great to be with you this morning. Before Kathy and I talk about the guide, Brian mentioned that we should provide an update about the exhibition program. So you know full well that we are required to be closed, and that we do not at this point in time know when we're going to be able to reopen, and exhibitions get scheduled with particular dates and arrangements, etc. And from Natalie, you've heard clearly that we have a real responsibility to discipline our finances going forward. So the executive team and Priscilla and I and Brian and Natalie have gone through an exercise of looking hard at our exhibition program upcoming. And we've had to make some really hard and painful decisions about shows that we won't be going forward with. So I just want to tell you now that those 4 shows are Gold Rush, The Allure of Matter, Fiji, and Crafting America. And the important thing to say at this point is that our staff working on these projects have invested an incredible amount of time and energy and creativity and thought leadership. And Brian and I really want to thank everyone who've worked on these shows to the point that we've had to make this decision, to really thank you for the investment that you've made in these projects. On the other side of the coin, obviously, our Jacob Lawrence show is closed, but our partners as upcoming venues for the exhibition, the Metropolitan Museum, the Birmingham Art Museum, and the Phillips Collection continue to pledge that they are going to present the show. So the project indeed will have longer legs, which we're really thrilled about. When we are open, and I'm assuming that we'll be open this fall, what we'll be able to offer is actually a very strong program, because we have a very flexible partner in the Kunstmuseum in Den Haag, from which the Made It exhibition originated. And so by November, we are hoping that that's the time frame in which we'll be opening Made It. And in October, the Salem Experience and the Witch Trial installations will be open. And the 2 teams working on those projects have really come together to create, I think, a really exciting platform for presenting things that we simply have not dealt with for a long, long time in our exhibition or our collection installations. And the team working on In American Waters is hard at work as a major show for us in 2021. And also in the fall, we'll have some smaller projects drawn from our collection. We'll be reinstalling the Anila Aga, All the Flowers Are For Me. Clearly, that was a project that really resonated so strongly with our audience, and I think it's going to strike even deeper chords now, given the feeling of calm and meditation and contemplation that that project instills in people. Trevor's also working on an installation of a single object called Pequod, made by the contemporary artist Michael McMillan, and Partitura will reopen, and it'll be interesting in that instance to see how people react to something that really requires a serious interaction with the material itself. So we'll be taking all sorts of precautions. So the guide is very much part of that positive scenario. And I know that we all know and are very proud of the fact that PEM is the oldest continuously operating museum in this country. And we also know that our collection includes around 1 million works of art, culture, and nature, library and archival materials, and historic properties. Our collection is truly, truly singular in its embrace of the American and global, the historical and contemporary, and the natural and man-made. Yet, if we could walk into our museum shop today, you would not find a guide to the museum and its collections. Incredibly enough, the last time we published a guide was back in the 1940s, and that version presented the collection as maritime, natural history, and ethnography. Obviously, it's high time that we have a PEM collection guide, and our curators and our publishing, collection services, development, marketing, and our shop staff are just thrilled that Brian so quickly recognized the need to have a printed ambassador for our museum. So we're deep into creating a collection guide that, yes, will be available this fall. This book will introduce the museum and its key collections to visitors, donors, and local and global readers. And when I say key collections, that means we are including the historic houses and the library and natural history collection. PEM is a complex museum with a complex and evolving network of stories to tell about regional and American identity, about how nature and global exchange enrich our understanding of the world, and about the value of curiosity, learning, discovery, and sharing. So, as we're working on the guide, we are asking, how can we convey the distinctly generous, human, entrepreneurial, and cross-cultural DNA of the museum and its collections? The museum guide is not intended to be comprehensive. It's our first foray into this in a long time, but it will be revealing and appealing. And I'm delighted to say that this project heralds our intent to develop much more robust ways to share and publish our collections. Kathy Fredrickson is spearheading the guidebook project, and she's eager to provide a sneak peek. Kathy?
Hi, everybody. I'm really glad that we can connect this morning, and I'm happy to be able to share some of what is really a work in progress at this point. One of the real silver linings of this project has been that we are all collaborating very closely, and it's keeping us really, really connected. Keeping the work going through the closure has proven that necessity is really the mother of invention, and I want to acknowledge everybody for their hard work, thoughtful contributions, and creative thinking. Now more than ever, it's important that we can share stories about PEM and its history, and that's another way for us to keep the doors open. And I also just want to quickly shout out to all of you who worked on some of these exhibitions that have regrettably been canceled. I know it's hard to imagine. Hopefully you can find ways to use your thinking and concentration in other ways. So I'm going to jump in here and just fly through what is really a work in progress. Mostly what I'm going to show you are concepts. We're in the process now of developing all the final content for the book and the manuscript and the design, but we thought it would be fun this morning just to give you an update on where we are in the process. So could I have the first slide, please? So the book will be about 6 3/4 inches wide by 9.5 inches tall. Linda had suggested that I provide something for scale, and as it turned out, it's about the same size as my son's head. So about the size of an adolescent 14-year-old. He needs a haircut, but I think we all do. And we're doing two versions. One will be a soft cover edition that we will be selling in the museum shop for under $20. And one will be a slightly more elaborate binding, what's called a flexi bind, which is like a hardcover with a flexible binding that we will work with development to share. Next slide, please. One of the things I love about design is that you have to start with concepts. And so the designer and I spent some time in the collections, and we had the opportunity to visit the library and look at some early materials in the library. we were particularly struck by some of these East India Marine Society logs and diaries, and as you'll see in the designs that I'm going to show you, that informed some of the work that we did. So next slide. So this is, these are concepts. This is a title page, and you can see that little early card, admissions card on the left. Next slide. This is a sample table of contents. And what you see on the right side is how those early logbooks informed some of our thinking about the design, yet we're trying to make it feel contemporary and of today, and really celebrate all the gorgeous materials in our collections. But you can see how we're using those rules and little ornaments, and you'll see more of that in a minute. As Linda mentioned, we're including natural history, we're including the library, we're including architectural highlights. The book will be alphabetical, starting with African and going through to South Asian. And we're trying to give every part of the collection, as much as we can, equal billing. We've commissioned some external consultants who have worked with our collections in the past, and who some of you will know. Krista Clark is helping us out with our African collection. Bruce McLaren is writing on our Chinese collections, and Midori Oka is writing on Japanese and Korean. And now I'm just going to quickly go through and show you some more of these pages. Click, please. So there'll be an introduction that Linda and Brian are working on now, where we'll look at some of the contemporary architecture, some of the goals for the museum going forward, and you can just click through, Sarah. Okay, so here's another example of an introduction. Thanks. Okay, you can stop here. Then we go into fashion and textiles. Next slide. And here you see how we're introducing each area of the collection and illustrating it with highlights from that area. So this is fashion and textiles. Next slide. That this is Asian export, and you can see how we're picking up on that design that you saw in those early log books, but making it feel fresh and contemporary. You know, this is not, this is meant to be a book for a general audience. We're asking the curators to write for that audience, which, you know, of course, they're very good at doing. So they're focusing on things like what were the most important things to come into the collection and when did they happen. And I think it's going to be wonderful to have this information, you know, consolidated in this little book. And I'm very grateful for all the work that all the curators are doing, and others, many others, to support this. Next slide. Here's an example of a spread in the fashion and textile section. This is one of the ways that we can show areas of the collection where we just have this incredible sweep of things across time and culture. So we've developed this design. We can use this for accessories. We can use this for, you know, elements from other parts of our collection, tools, or maritime maps, or ship models. But here's a sample to show you what we're thinking about. Can I have the next slide, please? And we also are seeding the book with stories. And we've asked the curators to think in particular about human-centric stories that relate to objects in the collection. And they've come up with some really wonderful ideas. So this is just a placeholder, but this is a Alexander McQueen dress that he made to honor his ancestor who was involved in, executed in the witch trials. So every curator has identified stories that we're going to bring to life the objects and the people who made PEM what it is today. Next slide. And with acknowledgement to George, who's helping us, we are creating a map. We're creating a lot of information graphics. And this is a map where we're showing some of the first things that were acquired by the first voyagers leaving from Salem. And George, I'm sorry, I got a much better version of this from you late last night, but I couldn't get it in. So you can see on the left, we're creating the content, and then on the right, that we're starting to think about how we would design it in the book, and that's a lot of fun, actually. And along with this information graphic, if you can go to the next slide, we're also creating a campus map, which we will illustrate our historic properties. As many of you know, a lot of people have no understanding of the scope of the historic homes in Salem that are owned by the museum and taken care of by the museum. So both in a section will feature highlights of architecture, and also we'll have a map where we'll illustrate some of these wonderful properties. And then there'll be a timeline that we're also working on that will talk about key moments in the museum's past, buildings, collections, history of the Peabody and Essex Institute. So this is all to say that it's very much a work in progress right now, but we're having a lot of fun. And I just want to thank you all and say I hope this worked out okay. This is a new way of presenting for me, and stay healthy.
Thanks, Kathy. You did great, and congratulations to you and everybody involved in this project. I hope you feel as excited as I do that what this is going to mean for the museum, but especially for our fundraising and our marketing capabilities and just spreading knowledge about what's in the collections. It's going to be a vehicle that's going to do that in very, very remarkable ways. And as you know, PEM is a bit of a unicorn in the museum world, and we have an unlikely origin story. We have a long and winding path, and an innovative spirit that's definitely in this book. I have a lot of questions here, so I just want to say that I'm going to continue to go through these, and if you don't have another meeting and have to sign off, I'll go through these questions now and answer them all. I don't think it'll take you that long. If you want to take the time, and I know that you've been there's a huge list of them here, but I'll get through them pretty quickly. But if anybody has to sign off, it is 10 o'clock. Thank you so much for joining with us. Thank you, Rob, for being with us. And I will provide as much information as I can reasonably at this time to these questions. And I really, want to emphasize the extent to which the Essex Institute was described to me by Carter Harrison recently, who's been involved in the museum for such a long time, as Salem at home, and the Peabody Museum was Salem at sea. And this idea that we have in Essex County, the most documented county in the country, and of course we're the repository of much of that history, and so our collections and staff and all the talent that they bring will be uniquely positioned, I think, particularly at this time. We're working on a Salem history project that the mayor invited. We have another number of other social aspects to put forward. Let me just take these questions. The first one is, what is the expected opening date? The answer is I don't exactly know, but I've said to you from the beginning that I do not anticipate we will be open before the end of June, and that's looking more and more likely, and that would be the 100 days that I'm talking about. And whether it's the July 4 weekend, how we actually open is a further question. So let me just say that we'll obviously have to bring staff back first, and that may be on a sequenced basis. We'll have to work out, will everybody be wearing masks, and what about sanitation, and what about movement, what about spacing for our staff, and then the readiness to take on the information desk, the admissions desk, whether we'll have more than one entry to spread people out. All those sorts of things we're now moving on in the COVID-19 task force. So it had a very different perspective a month ago, and now we're looking towards this perspective. So I imagine I'm very hopeful that it will be in early July, but we can't say right now. And we'll have to think and plan for a recurrence of COVID-19 in the fall, and indeed until there's a vaccine. So, all those scenarios are part of our modeling right now, and we will welcome any of you to be involved with your ideas. Just send them forward to relevant staff. When will the reduction in staff take place? A number of you have asked this. Again, I don't know yet. If we get the PPP, which I expect we will, we have to work out how that can be drawn down by the museum and essentially seek to keep the paycheck program in place for everybody. Related to that is the next question, which is what, will our health insurance be impacted for the rest of 2020? Again, we're keeping everybody whole now, and I hope you have noted that all around us museums have announced furloughs and layoffs, and we have not. So we're trying to keep whole for as long as we can, and indeed, of course, that applies to wages and benefits, including health insurance. Those, of course, who might not be with us later in the year, we would seek to extend health insurance for a period of time, but that would be impacted, yes, certainly, and I know that's very worrying for you. Here's a bit of amusement. Did I read all the books behind me? Well, this is only one of my bookshelves and only part of my library, so the answer is of course not. But I have dipped into all of them, otherwise I wouldn't have bought them. And I've read many of them, but that's sort of 30 years of reading. I seek to keep myself up to date on quite a lot of different things. As you look forward to the next 3 to 5 years, what are a few of the topics that most excite me? Well, the re-envisioning of the museum, the reimagining of the museum really seriously excites me. It's the reason I came to PEM. It is an extraordinary institution. It is unique, and it has a unique possibility. I mean, the other day, well, not the other day, but it's before we closed 6 weeks ago, walking in with Andres Santo into the Plummer Hall and the whole of the Plummer Dalen building, knowing we spent $12 million on that building already, really for the exterior, dropping down the door more recently, putting in an elevator. And to have an institution like that could be a great educational institution, it could be so many different things, and to know that it's not even in use right now gives a sense of vision about what this museum can be moving forward. And that's going to be so important to people locally, of course, but it has to be part of our agenda and of course of our financial possibility when we launch a new campaign. So many aspects of our future excite me. The effects, pros and cons of using a long-term average to the endowment draw, say 5 years instead of 3. Yes, thank you for asking that question. We do use the 3-year rolling average around the quarters, so 36 quarters. But we are looking at what 60 quarters would mean. What that means effectively is 60 quarters, 5 years. It slows down the rate of your growth of your endowment in an upturn, and it slows it down in a downturn. On the other hand, it means that you're picking up the worst years later. So for example, when I was in Toledo, where they had a 5-year rolling average as opposed to PEM at 3, it was 2013, which was our weakest year, as we pulled the years of 2009 forward. And so the budget was lowest in 2013. And so the longer average is challenging. The 36 is under review, and we'll leave that with our investment committee, and it has been raised with them, but great detailed question. To elaborate on where we are with the master plan, we are moving to have an RFI, a request for information process, where we will look to various firms to put forward ideas, and which will help to stimulate us in working out what we might do with our 35 properties. And that will proceed. It will proceed at a slower rate than we would have done if we hadn't been in our current situation. But lots of ideas have come up already for fundraising, but also for revenue raising on the earn side. And so we have pop-up shops in the works for the fall, and other ways to engage revenue, which will help to boost our circumstances, which is going to be more important. Will the phase 3 roundtables for the strategic plan be constituted remotely and take a more condensed format? Yes, I think on both those points, and thank you for the question. We'll certainly do that, and we'll begin fairly soon. Somebody asked the way that they understand that PEM pays no residential tax to Salem because it's a non-profit. How can we therefore get a small business loan grant? Well, the answer to that is that non-profits are included in the Paycheck Protection Program. And we've been very pleased with the government response to this crisis has been, I think, a response to all the work that foundations and museums and others, the American Alliance of Museums, have done over recent years. So compared to 2009-10, you know, the NEA, the NEH, IMLS, they've all received increases in funding as part of the CARES Act, but also nonprofits like ourselves have been included. So that's obviously a very welcome aspect. And the next round that they're looking at is for institutions that are nonprofits and for profits that have more than 500 employees, because the current PPP applies to ones that have only less than 500. We hear about forthcoming cuts every week and it's causing anxiety. Can we please have a sense of when the job cuts are coming? You will have a sense soon. We had to wait to see if we would get the PPP, to see if that could postpone them. And how long that's the case will be subject to the guidelines of the PPP, which we haven't fully got yet. So I truly appreciate that this is, you know, nerve-wracking for people to know, well, when is this going to fall and who's going to be affected? But I can only tell you when I have the appropriate information to make the best decision, because that will influence the impact that we have to have. When will staff be notified if they're laid off or furloughed? Well, at the point where we make the decision as to what date that will be active from. And we have, as I said, assured to April 30. So if we hadn't had the PPP, it would probably have occurred before then, which is obviously soon now. With the PPP, it may occur later than that. It's an 8-week loan program, which can become a grant under certain circumstances. So it's essentially a loan that's forgiven under certain circumstances. And I'm working with Natalie and other members of staff to get the details of that so we can model what the impacts will be. And the idea is to try to minimize them as much as possible, of course. Somebody asked, is it 20% of the staff that needs to be cut or 20% of the staff budget, and whether they're going to be layoffs or furloughs? And somebody else asked, was there a 60% staff reduction? So let me just clarify that. What I said was that 60% of our $36 million is actually for wages and benefits. So that's a very sizable budget. And that is what we will need to impact. So it's the proportion of that budget, and that's relative to a whole lot of things. Like, for example, we've announced we won't have pay raises. If we do get the PPP, I'll be taking a 25% pay cut, and then others will take a pay cut down to 100,000. So PPP only applies to the first 100,000 of people's wages, and many people don't receive that, so they will not have any cut. But anybody above 100,000 will not be covered by the PPP for anything above that, and therefore we'll have to make that contribution to reduced pay. And so these are all difficult issues, and we won't be able to, for example, have, I believe, and Nancy will alert you to this, we'd be taking vacation while we're closed, even though we may be working, because the good fortune is that we're actually remaining whole on our pay and benefits. And these are difficult decisions, but the institutional aspect has to come into play, that the staff are such a huge and important part, the most important part of the institution, really. But the institution has to be able to carry forward, and that goes to a close examination of our finances. Is there a sense of what benchmarks need to be realized on the way to reopening? And we're working on those, and will the reopening be fully fledged or partial? Again, we're working on those. Will we work to open for a period of time in each day? Will we work to open for members only first? All these kinds of questions are live with us right now. Collecting the Globe, I'm told here, is of course available in the PEM store. So the PEM shop has it, and you get a 20% discount on it there. So please do buy it from us. The Andros Santo article mentioned lean more on younger staff, and how's PEM considering this point of view, and how will all staff be kept safe and treated equitably? And did I mention the percentage of staff reductions that we'll see? Could this be explained? Well, I've already covered that. I think that you know, it will be a significant reduction that we'll need given what we're talking about, but it's not clear what that number will be yet. In terms of leaning more on younger staff, Andros said that. What he really means by that, I reckon, is that yes, younger people have attracted COVID-19, but generally speaking, they don't. And it's people with underlying conditions and who are older and who are more prone to entering the ICU and the ER on the way there. And once that happens, that's very, very serious indeed. So it's not that those staff would be exposed dangerously, it's that they're less vulnerable as a sector, though there's going to be an awful lot of science that comes through on this in years to come, and we're only going on what we know now. But that's what he said, and I mean, a lot of our staff on the front lines are younger actually anyway, but it's not about their age, it's about their enthusiasm and the excitement that they bring, but they will have to be kept safe. And we're looking at, for example, will we have a cashless arrangement whereby people wouldn't be touching money, and what sort of sanitation arrangements we'll have, and whether we will take people's temperature on the way in the door, otherwise they don't come in. What sort of information will we require from people moving forward from a security point of view, and what sort of identification we have to add. And all of these aspects are part of the current discussion. Can we expect specifics on who will be experiencing personnel cuts? Well, in due course, and obviously we've had to examine this very, very carefully in preparation, but it's subject to what happens. And as soon as I can, just to relieve relief, I will let you know one way or the other, but we have to model it properly. Otherwise, we could make a decision to be more drastic than we actually needed to be, and we wouldn't want to do that. The exhibitions that we've cancelled, speaking about those, this has been mentioned, the 4 exhibitions, and we've communicated that to the organising institutions of those shows. I totally endorse Linda's comment that we commiserate hugely, as does Priscilla, with everybody who's been involved in those shows. But we have to, I mean, if it's a calculation. For example, if we had already expended 200,000 on a show and the total budget was 800,000, and we can save 600,000, and we only anticipated maybe bringing in 100,000 in revenues or whatever, because exhibitions are cost heavy. I mean, we spend a fortune per visitor to do an exhibition. They may pay $20, but it often costs $100 to put it on. And so we've saved all that extra money, which of course helps our staffing situation and helps our situation moving forward, because we're anticipating lower numbers of people coming. And how do we envisage the reopening? I think we'll have to have a degree of celebration, and there's a virtual aspect to that as well. But you know, the sort of slow entry will be important. People have talked about soft opening and moving to harder, and that's like software and hardware in terms of the virtual world. But we'll be planning to get people excited. If we truly are an essential service, and we always say that, well, we're actually closed right now, but we believe that art and museums are essential, and culture, history, all of this, the archive, our library, all these are essential. Well, then we have to be among the first to open, but we have to do that very carefully on health guidelines. Can we update you on the task forces? So the task forces have been a little confusing, I know, for some people. We obviously had a COVID-19 task force that was very specific. So the task forces have leadership established, and it's not meant to be a group of people designated. It operates on the principle of the competing values framework, which is a 4C principle. So you'll need creators to do things first. You'll need competitors to do things fast. You'll need collaborators to do things together, and you need controllers to do things right. And at different stages of projects, you need different people with different skill sets. And so we've been calling people in as we move forward. And the finance task force, of course, has been very, very active, but it's a small, tight group. Similarly, on investments, these are very particular things. But we will call people in as we need them moving forward. And as the COVID-19 task force switches much more to opening, you can see that we'll need more participation there from those who are front-faced. The timeline again for staff reductions. How tied is the CARES funding to reductions? I think we've answered that. I just re-emphasize what I said in my opening remarks. And this will postpone the actions we need to take. But essentially, the government is giving us funding, which we can then use to relieve our existing loss of revenues. So we closed and we kept all our staff expenses. We modified our non-staff expenses, and we were seriously impacted in earned revenues, though we've managed to hold up contributed revenues. So that's all a balancing act as we move forward. What will draw visitors with the cancellation of the exhibitions? Well, you can see what we're doing. We reckon that we'll be looking more to a local and regional audience. So the pivot that we've had to the guidebook, to the Salem experience, to focusing on the witch trials and material that our museum holds there. We're not competing with the Witch Museum, don't get that wrong. But to actively attract all the people who come for those activities and give them a history of Salem, the ABCs of Salem. That's, I think, very, very exciting. And then, of course, made it in an election year in November, the presidential election, but the year of the centenary of female suffrage for most women 100 years ago. A great show to do. I think that would be very attractive. When this question, it's the last question I have here. We're all worried about our jobs. Why haven't we been updated? Well, I know what you mean by that. You mean, when can I relieve your worry? But you have been updated with the information that we can give you. And the update has been good so far, that you've been kept whole for the entire of the period so far. And you will be for a period in the future. And the Paycheck Protection Program will protect a lot more people for longer through the crisis. But we will need to adapt to our finances moving forward. And just to repeat, you will be updated on that as soon as I can. And that will be based on the best modeling and scenario information that we can get with our staff who are working hard on this. Remember, we haven't got the guidelines, the specific guidelines for the loan becoming a grant yet. And that's still being worked on. And these are details. And it's very, very important because if you take out a loan that's not going to be forgiven, that's got a different impact on our budget. We lose that 2 million as opposed to gain it. And if that's what the number is, and it'll be a bit bigger than that for us, given the scale of our workforce. But we've kept all of our workforce, 230 something full-time staff, whole so far. And even the Boston Globe was asking the other day, how are we doing that? Well, because we've decided to privilege this, and we're obviously in a fortunate position with our endowment, but we're also in a small market and with relatively small visitation. We don't have 1 million visitors a year normally, and we know we will be impacted. So I do feel the pain of your question, and I know that you want to take this off your stress as soon as possible, and we will do it as soon as possible. But no news is also good news, and that's the way it's been so far, even though it doesn't satisfy that worry that you have. So that's all your questions. I encourage you to send more, and don't be shy about asking anything of us. We will tell you what we can when we can, and I'm trying to be as transparent with you as possible. So I hope all that helped. And once again, thank you so much for joining us to this virtual all-staff meeting in exceptional circumstances and exceptional times. And we look forward to happier times in the future, but also we need to wake up every day and realize that yes, it's spring and the flowers are out, and we're here, and we're with our family, and we have to be close, and we've all sorts of restrictions, but we will go through one step at a time, day by day, with the appropriate decisions, one made after the other in the appropriate time, and we will open again, and we will rejoice in all the great and good joy that is the Peabody Essex Museum. Thank you so much. Best wishes, and I'll be back to you next Thursday. Bye for now.